Hello again. Trials in Britain, and also not just criminal trials, but some civil cases involving barristers, are a lot more formal and solemn than in some other countries, the United States, for example. In this country, robes, old-fashioned clothing, and the kind of wigs worn in the 18th century are the standard garb for barristers and judges, and they certainly serve to make a courtroom a somewhat forbidding place, as most of us think is probably no bad thing. It underlines the solemnity of the occasion. Now, all this tradition is probably about to be ditched because a few black barristers have afros and say that the wigs won't fit over their hair properly. Of course, hopelessly unsympathetic and old-fashioned people might at this point be tempted to growl, "Well, get your bloody hair cut then," but I shall avoid saying anything of this kind. Instead, I shall quote what one or two black barristers have had to say on the subject. Michael Etienne had a row in court a couple of years ago when he tried to appear without a wig. He says that this hair discrimination, as he describes it, is a form of racism. Leslie Thomas, another black barrister, says that wigs are a ridiculous costume that represents a culturally insensitive climate. He says the wigs should certainly go. There isn't any place in a modern society for barristers to be wearing 17th century fashion. A black woman lawyer says that something overlooked often in black culture is that your hair is so inexplicably important and it is completely interwoven with your identity. Now, I am quite aware that hair is a big deal among people of Caribbean heritage, although a little less so for Africans. I have no problem at all with that, but I cannot quite see why the cultural traditions of the Caribbean should take preference over the cultural traditions of this country. There are any number of traditions and cultural practices across the world which are to the indigenous inhabitants very important, no matter how foolish and pointless they may seem to the rest of us. You will find such traditions in South America, Africa, China, Russia, Hawaii, Greenland, and of course Europe. If I took my family to live in another continent, it's not clear to me that my own cultural traditions, whether relating to hair or anything else, should take precedence over the cultural traditions of the indigenous inhabitants of whichever territory I moved to. I think it would be more fitting, really, if I adapted to their traditions rather than insisted that their way of, say, conducting criminal trials, for instance, should be completely changed so that I could observe some tradition relating to my hairstyle. This really does seem to me to be the only rational way of viewing the matter. You see, we hear a lot about First Nations and Indigenous peoples and so on, and how we must respect customs and traditions. But you see, I am in the First Nation here. I actually am a member of the Indigenous population. And so I think really that it's my customs which ought to take preference in this particular territory. In the description to this video, I give a link to a news item about this. It's a very curious point that we have a huge amount of respect for the customs and traditions of Indigenous people anywhere in the world. But when it comes to our own customs and traditions, we feel almost embarrassed or ashamed of them, and we're only too ready to abandon them if somebody doesn't like them. I don't see really why that should be.